we are going to get into foreign policy. It's about to get weird. Give it up for the most radical historian you've probably ever met, Cory Hughes.
Hello, everybody. Thank you again for having me. My name is Cory Hughes, and I'm primarily a Kennedy assassination researcher. However, I've been on Kennedy for 8 years in July. Prior to that, I spent 3 years on the Holocaust. So I've been a historian for about 10 or 11 years. Today, we're going to talk about Israel, which, to be honest with you, is not really one of my favorite things to talk about for, I think, what will be obvious reasons. The story of Israel, I have found, is an essential part of understanding the entirety of the 20th century. The entirety of the 20th century is the story of Israel, going back to 1896. Every major event of the 20th century is tied to the Israelis, even going back before 48, because the same people who ultimately founded the state of Israel had their fingers on the scale of history for decades before that and played integral roles in the First World War, Second World War, everything leading up to the creation of Israel in 1948. So where did it all begin? Some people will argue that the Jewish question and the fundamentals of wanting a Jewish state go back hundreds of years, and that's absolutely true. Most people think that the Jewish question or the Jewish problem was something that Adolf Hitler had come up with, and that's absolutely not true. Has anybody here read the diaries of Theodor Herzl? Okay, so the diaries of Theodor Herzl is about 2,000 pages long. It covers a period from about early 1894 till about 1897. And I'm about 400 pages into it. And I can tell you with absolute certainty, Theodor Herzl, who is the father of modern political Zionism, was an absolute raving lunatic. He ended up dying in a mental institution at the age of 41. So the foundations of the state of Israel come from a madman. But the theories and the concepts that Herzl was obsessed with go back centuries. Jews were run out of every country they've ever been in. And we're not going to get into why, but that is a fact. And that kind of shaped the realities of the Jewish question. Within Jewish circles, that is. It was something that was discussed for a long time before Herzl. Herzl really is the first to put it on paper and try to articulate a solution to the Jewish problem, which is, what do we do with the Jews who are a people within a people who have no homeland? We'll get to that in a little bit, but that's a false reality. It's farcical in nature. So in 1896, Theodor Herzl, in his diaries, he had written about the need for the Jewish homeland because Jews were ostracized everywhere. He would write this while simultaneously complaining about virtually all of the lower class Jews who didn't contribute to upper elite society in Germany in the late 1800s. I think it's kind of weird that one nation produced Marx, Herzl, and Hitler all within like a couple decades. It's truly unbelievable. Three of the most rigid political and religious philosophies all came from the same place at the same time. Very unusual. But he felt the need for Jews to have a homeland because of persecution, while at the same time admitting that he really didn't want to associate with the lower class Jews. So there's an utter contradiction in his ideology. He took a lot of his inspiration from a guy, I forget his first name, but his name was Hirsch. And Hirsch was, like Herzl, wanted to found a Jewish colony, and he did. He founded a Jewish colony in Argentina. Now, I know recently in the news we've seen that in Patagonia and in Argentina and in Chile and other places in South America, we have wildfires out of control, started by Israelis. And if you ask me, this is all hearkening back to the early days of Herzl, trying to fulfill Herzl's visions, because originally Herzl didn't suggest that Palestine be the home of Israel. He just wanted a home anywhere he could get one for the Jewish people. But by 1897, when they had the first Zionist Congress, that whole idea was scrapped, and they kind of set their sights on Palestine. I think it's kind of odd that in modern day Zionists are going through Herzl's original works, and they're trying to now set up colonies everywhere he mentioned in his diaries, which is kind of weird. So the Hirsch situation back in the late 1800s was very interesting. Hirsch had set up a colony in Argentina with about 15,000 Jews. I don't know what happened to this colony since then, but that was where Herzl got the original inspiration. After Herzl, you have, and after 1897, when Zionism, political Zionism, is an actual thing, it is a new political reality, I'd say. The push for Zionism around the world, it spread very rapidly, especially in the United States. I would say by 1933, when Hitler came to power in Germany, that Zionist forces had already taken over this country. We were already on the way to being cooked by 33. They had people on the Supreme Court. You had Henry Morgenthau, who was the Secretary of the Treasury, who was he wanted to basically murder all the Germans. That was his solution to Hitler and the Nazis, was just kill them all. So obviously, when you get into the 1930s and you get into Hitler and you start to examine National Socialism and the rise of National Socialism, what I found is that National Socialism and Hitler in the first place it didn't arise in a vacuum. The extreme attitudes of the Nazis and the National Socialists, basically, it was an extreme reaction to what they saw as an intentional undermining and destruction of German culture that was going back to the 1860s. Now, 1860s, this is when Herzl is alive in Germany, and Herzl was very aware of and acknowledged in his diaries that control of the press, control of large portions of the government and just society in general, were controlled by Jews. This is what led to the rise of Adolf Hitler and National Socialism. It was a very reactionary movement to a movement that had started in 1896, but had really been influencing German culture prior to that. So, World War II, has anyone here ever studied World War II? What aspects? The official story version, the gas chambers, any of that stuff? Anybody here still believe that gas chambers were real?
I was there.
Okay. There were no gas chambers.
There were gas chambers.
No, where were there gas chambers?
I was a child when I went to the gas chambers.
Where was there a gas chamber? No, there weren't. No, there were only 6 camps that had gas chambers. Majdanek, Auschwitz, Chelmino, Sobibor, Treblinka, right? Right. Those buildings are fakes. The gas chamber at Auschwitz was built in 1947. It was converted from a building that was originally a morgue, then turned into an air raid shelter. It was never a gas chamber. So the entire stories of World War II, and the persecution of Jews, which, and if you ask anybody, any rational person, was a little extreme and over the top. However, really what went on during the Holocaust was a system of slave labor and deportation. The Holocaust stories that you read about the torture in the camps, all the Mengele stuff, this is all what's called wartime propaganda. None of it has any origin in reality. So after the war, this is where, for me, it gets the most fascinating in regards to the origins of the State of Israel. In 1946, after the war is over, you have what I call the pre-Israeli Zionists. You have Ben-Gurion, Chaim Weizmann, this whole crew, start trying to establish State of Israel. They came to America and they wanted all of our surplus weapons from the war. And we said no. They wanted to fight the Palestinians, get the Palestinians out so they could have their state. And we wouldn't give it to them. So what happens? Ben-Gurion sends a guy named Reuven Daphne, who was an emissary of the Haganah, to meet with Bugsy Siegel, the Mafia, the Jewish mobster in Los Angeles. They meet in 1946, and we have the details on their initial conversations. It's very fascinating. Reuven Daphne tells Bugsy Siegel that we're fighting for a Jewish state. Remember, all the big mobsters were Jews. Meyer Lansky, Albert Anastasia, Mickey Cohen, Bugsy Siegel, these are all Jews. The Jews ran the large-scale international syndicate, whereas the Italians ran the local mafia in the various cities across the country. But Reuven Daphne tells Bugsy Siegel that we're fighting. And he goes, what do you mean you're fighting? You mean you're killing? And he says, yes. And that right there started the relationship between the United States Mafia, run by Jews, and the pre-Israeli Zionists. The following year, Ben-Gurion himself will partner directly with Meyer Lansky, who ran the mob, basically from the 1930s all the way through to the 70s. And they then established what's called the Sonborn Institute. The Sonborn Institute was a large-scale international weapons smuggling operation that basically lasted from 47 at least until 1961, 62. And what they did was the Sonborn Institute was basically a cover for the rampant and wide-scale burglaries of our armories here in America. There were at least 2 or 3 in California. There were 3 in Louisiana, 1 in Chicago. There's a handful more across the country, but over a 20-year period, the Israelis basically, through their associates here in America, broke in to these armories, stole the weapons, and this is where it starts to tie into Kennedy. Because a lot of people think that you have a guy named David Ferry, who was in the JFK film that Oliver Stone put out. Basically, David Ferry and his guys ended up doing 3 burglaries of armories in Louisiana. 1961, they break into the Houma, Louisiana bunker, and all the weapons, everyone for a long time thought that those weapons were going to anti-Castro Cubans in order to oust Castro. That is false. All of those weapons that they stole and all the weapons from Sonborn ended up getting funneled through CIA companies and then sent to Israel for about 20 years. So that's a little backstory on how they got some of the weapons that they were using to kill the Palestinians. And you got to think between 46 and 48, they say displaced, I say killed, somewhere in the neighborhood of 800,000 Palestinians. This is an abomination in and of itself. These are people who have no connection to this land. And so you can see that Israel itself wouldn't have come about if it wasn't for the help of the United States Mafia. Thinking on a little larger scale, there was a bank set up called the Banque de Crédit International, BCI. This is different from BCCI, which was connected to George Bush a decade later with the Safari Club and that stuff. But BCI was set up by a guy named Tibor Rosenbaum and a guy named Edgar Bronfman. And this was the very first bank that was used by Israel in all their international dealings. This is also the same bank that Meyer Lansky used to funnel all of his drug money that they were, because they set up the drug trafficking routes between Venezuela and Saigon. And so all the money that was coming in from all the heroin that was being processed was being run through BCI. And the United States Mafia under Meyer Lansky basically funded to the tune of probably hundreds of millions, if not billions, the origins of the state of Israel. So that is kind of, in a nutshell, how the state of Israel came about. Now, to me, the most important aspect, well, not really the most important aspect, but a significant portion of the story of Israel is the Kennedy assassination. And to link Israel to the Kennedy assassination is actually not that difficult. So you have those relationships in 46 between now the pre-Israeli Zionists and Mickey Cohen and Bugsy Siegel and that whole crew out there. Those guys played an instrumental role in the assassination itself. The first phone call that Jack Ruby made after Oswald gets arrested at the Texas Theater is to a guy named Al Gruber. Al Gruber was the right-hand man of Mickey Cohen, and all of them were banging this woman named Candy Barr, who was a dancer for Jack Ruby. So the connections between the Israelis and Jack Ruby are there, ever present. No one ever really understood how Jack Ruby could be involved with the Mafia because he was Jewish, which is the biggest joke in the world to me. But when you come to understand that the Mafia in LA, particularly Mickey Cohen, by 49, his personal rabbi was Menachem Begin, who was considered to be the father of all terrorism in the world, responsible for the bombing of the King David Hotel in 46. After the bombing of the King David Hotel, he basically had to get out of Israel. And where did he go? He went to LA and he hid out there. And basically the relationship between the pre-Israeli Zionists and the LA mob became like one organization, to the point where Mickey Cohen probably got killed in part because his loyalties were more towards Israel than it was the Mafia. That was a big problem for his peers. So why would the Israelis want to kill Kennedy? Well, you have to understand that starting in 56, the Israelis started to steal our nuclear material through a company called NUMEC, the Nuclear Materials and Equipment Corporation, which was being run out of Apollo, Pennsylvania, by a guy named Zalman Shapiro, a Jew from Philadelphia. Basically, between 56 and around 64, somewhere in the neighborhood of 650 pounds of enriched uranium was stolen, shipped by the Mafia via the ports over to Israel. So today, to this very day, they deny they have a nuclear program. But they definitely have one because they stole all the materials from us. A guy named Ryan Dawson recently did a documentary on NUMEC. It's on YouTube. It's very fascinating. The connections in there, when you come to understand the era of the Israeli involvement with the Mafia between the 40s and the 60s, it becomes truly unbelievable at how inseparable they really were. And then it got to a point where the Jewish end of the Mafia just outgrew everyone else and went legit, pretty much, and left the Italians back to have their little cities. But without them, there really was no need for the Mafia at all. The Mafia really doesn't do much today. I have a feeling they still are involved in drug trade and who knows what else, some sort of import-export. But other than that, the Mafia is kind of an ineffective organization today. Because it was just outgrown by the people who are running it. So, and as far as what's going on today, I can't help, or maybe it's just because I see the whole world through the lens of the Kennedy assassination, I can't help but see that every single thing happening today in the Middle East is a direct result of Kennedy's assassination. So April, May of 1963, you have a series of letters exchanged between Ben-Gurion and Kennedy. It's come to be known as the Battle of Letters. And ultimately, in 1960, it was outed that the Israelis were building a nuclear reactor in the Negev Desert, Dimona. And from 1960 all the way to 63, Kennedy gets in January 61. When you look at his schedule and you look at his communications, he was obsessed with Israel and their nuclear program. And ultimately, they wouldn't let him in. They wouldn't let inspectors in. And then when they finally agreed to let inspectors in, they ended up building like fake control rooms to show that it wasn't. I mean, they just went to great lengths to fake what was going on inside Dimona. To this very day, they still don't acknowledge they have a program. This was one factor. And for a long time, I thought this was the only factor. But that is not the only factor. The ultimate factor of why Israel killed Kennedy via their proxies in the CIA and the Mafia is because he was going to end all aid. That's really what it came down to. And without any aid from us, Israel's not a country. They couldn't last 2 weeks. I mean, I think that the 12-day war showed that last year. You know, if we hadn't intervened, there wouldn't be an Israel today because Iran would have taken them out, which is hopefully on the agenda very soon. But the founding of the State of Israel, to me, is the single greatest abomination of the 20th century. And people say, well, shouldn't the Jews have a homeland? No, absolutely not. Ideologies don't get states, and God is not a real estate agent. So if you go into the origins of most Israelis are Europeans. This is a fact. And if you want to go into the history of where these people actually come from, it's not really a mystery. It's actually very well documented. There was not a white Jew on planet Earth until the 8th century. In the 8th century, King Bulan of the Khazar Empire converted his people, and his entire kingdom to Judaism. This is the first time there were any white Jews on the planet. The earliest and the longest running Jewish communities in the world to this very day are in Northern Africa, Tunisia, Somalia, Ethiopia. Ethiopia claims to have the Ark of the Covenant. And that should give you some kind of indication on their role in the early history of the Bible. But there was none of the people who were Jews in the Middle East up through 70 AD. They have no connection to these people who call themselves Jews today and who are running the State of Israel. I think every single prime minister of Israel has been from Poland, if I'm not mistaken. So the fact that, to me, this is nothing more than some sort of, imperialist project, some colonial imperialist project. But it seems destined to fail. It seems destined to fail. Does anybody have any questions about it? He's from Poland, isn't he? Yeah, he's from Poland, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
That was actually your question.
Yeah, he's from Poland. Just like Golda Meir and Yitzhak Shamir, Rabin, those guys were all from Poland. So as you see, after, in the 1200s, the first time we see white Jews in Europe is in around 1220. They show up in the Rhineland in Germany, and they show up in Poland in large numbers. This is because they were driven out of their actual homeland, which is basically the region of the Ukraine, the Donbass region of the Ukraine, the former Khazar Empire. The Khazar Empire, we had a lot of empires in the world over the centuries and millennia, but the Khazar Empire is one that really doesn't get much attention, and a lot of the history books kind of brush over it. But it was a very large and powerful empire that eventually was destroyed by the Russians, and the Russians drove everybody from that region into Europe, further into Europe. And that's when we see the first Jews pop up in Europe in the 1200s. So today, what we're dealing with is so, to me, contrary to everything that every person is taught to believe growing up from a moral perspective. You have a bunch of people who aren't from a land who went into a land and took it. Now, people will say, well, America's the same way. It's on stolen land. Yes, that's 100% true. But see, we as a civilization have evolved. And after World War II, we agreed we wouldn't do this anymore. And that's why there's a difference here. Once upon a time, we were savages, even in the 1700s, right? So yes, it's absolutely true. We live on stolen land, 100%. But that's just how the world worked until we made a decisive decision not to do this anymore. And so other than some minor regional squabbles you have around the world, nobody has ever done anything. Nobody has been so egregious in their violations of international law like the Israelis. And is there a solution to this? I don't think so. So people don't like this term, but I'm rather black-pilled because I kind of understand how deep this infiltration has gone in America here. Obviously, Trump, who I thought at one time would have been one of the good guys, has turned out to be completely on the take of Israel, a foreign country. He allegedly converted to Judaism in a private ceremony a couple of years ago. I don't know if that's true. We've actually had 4 or 5 different Jewish presidents, but none of them ever admitted it. So it's kind of a weird thing to keep off your resume if you're running for president. Let me see who we have. Abraham Lincoln, Sephardic Jewish roots. Roosevelt, Eisenhower, Lyndon Johnson, 100%. And now Trump. What is that, 4 or 5? That's too many if you ask me. So one of the reasons I really don't like giving a lot of talks on this subject is because it often comes off, I try to come off as from a historical perspective, but oftentimes it doesn't get interpreted that way, and it comes off as a fuck the Jews talk, and that's not really what I'm here to do. The problem with Jews is the identity issue. These are white people from countries that all our ancestors come from, but yet they've separated themselves on purpose for reasons unknown. So, anybody have any questions on the history of Israel?
Why do you want Iran to take out Israel?
Because Israel is an abomination of a nation. They killed Kennedy. They did 9/11. They created COVID-19. They're the worst thing that's ever happened to us if you're a conspiratorial person. They've been behind everything. This is very easily traceable. This is what I do for a living. I've been doing this for 10, 11 years now. And
You talk about savage behavior. Would that be savage behavior?
that is savage behavior. You could yeah, it's definitely savage behavior, for sure. But no one else is doing that. No one else is going around murdering their enemies like that. We don't even do that to the degree that they do. It's just brazen. And another problem is that there's a thing in Israel, I believe it's called the Sayanim. And this is basically their recruitment of Jews around the world to be spies. And this is a fact. This is on their webpage. This is on Wikipedia. So it's hard to, when you talk about dual loyalty, go back and look at something like Sonborn. Because that's really what the concern is here in America. You have a people who claim to be 2 to 3% of the population who are probably closer to 7 or 8% of the population because they don't participate in the census, who have basically infiltrated every aspect of this country, and they've done that for 100 years. They've they're now in control of our government. This is what it looks like to have Jews in control of our government, who don't give a fuck about democracy, don't give a fuck about any American tradition, American history. And our country is being driven into the toilet right now, and it's being done on purpose. When the last administration funneled how many, 10, 20, 30 million people into this country? That is that's the Jewish conspiracy Hitler warned us about 100 years ago, coming to full fruition. I don't know how anybody can see it any different. So, do you have a question?
So you're saying you would rather live under Iranian control than under Israeli control?
No, I'd rather live under American control.
Well, if you want Iran to take out Israel, then
Yes.
who is going to moderate the Middle East? Because right now, Israel is standing in the gap.
No, they're not.
Yes,
Israel
they
is the
are.
only
Yes,
problem.
they are.
No, they're not. Israel
Yes,
is
they are.
Israel is the only problem in the Middle East. Israel is the only country that's bombed 7 of their neighbors this year. This year, in the last 12 months, 7 countries. And you think that's okay? Explain your point of view. I want to hear it.
Point of view is that when somebody fires a rocket or missiles at me, I'm going to fire back.
Okay. They
So
invaded
Hamas-
a region they don't belong in, and they stole
No.
a whole country.
They didn't.
They
So
did.
you can say
Yes,
that-
they did.
Are you going to let me explain my position, or are you
Your
going to yell at
position
me?
is a straw man. Go ahead.
Okay. Oh my
Cory,
gosh.
come on.
Corey.
Corey, like,
Yeah, you
Speak.
can just go ahead and yell over me.
Go ahead and
then
speak.
That,
I'm
that
listening.
might makes right.
How to just being a straw man.
Do you want to move on? Did you have a question?
I'll just have a conversation with her. That's fine. You can give it back to her.
No, that's all right. It's all right. It's all right. Okay. So how many, how large do you think that the state of Israel is as far as like a population?
I'm sorry. Say it again.
So the population of Israel, like how many people are like comprise the state of Israel?
Was it 8 to 10 million?
Something like that.
Right.
That sounds right to me. And then like how big is their landmass? Like how big is their country as far as square
Oh, it's the
miles?
size of Rhode Island.
Okay, 10,000 square miles?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this group of people that's like, how many Arabs are there within like the greater region?
Well, it's their region.
Okay, but just go ahead and like, entertain me with that.
Well, we have, 70 million in Iran alone. So you're probably looking a couple 100 million total.
I agree with that fully.
Sure.
So this very small group that's like 0.02%, according to Google or whatever,
Right.
of the population is like somehow they're the worst thing ever.
Yes.
And yet they've like been able to like
Yes.
come from like the Holocaust that you say didn't happen.
Yes.
And then move into the homeland that they occupied
Yes.
before.
They didn't occupy it before.
They weren't there back
No.
in like
These are white people from Europe.
Okay, so they didn't. There was no diaspora. That was like all fake.
Yes, the diaspora was Africa.
Okay, so the Jews went to Africa.
Yes, because that's where the Jews came from.
Okay, but they didn't come from Israel. They just made.
No, what I'm
this
saying
out
is-
whole cloth.
I'm saying no white person comes from the Middle East.
Okay, huh.
No Caucasian white person comes from Israel, ever. Back in the day, the earliest,
So
like I
if
said
you
already,
if there was a if there was a diaspora,
Mm-hmm.
right? If in 70 A.D. that the Romans came in and they
Right. Mm-hmm.
totally took them out, and like 135 there was the Bar
And allegedly they
Kokhba
scattered throughout
and
the
they,
world,
like,
right?
Yes, scattered all like
Right. Mm-hmm.
world Jewry around the world.
Right.
That somehow those people didn't actually like maintain their national and ethnic heritage through 2 millennium to come back to their homeland. That's
No.
just like a fiction.
Correct.
So
Correct.
like when Jesus,
There were
was,
no
like,
white people in the Middle
like,
East
didn't actually
2,000
die on
years
the
ago.
cross. All his like followers all like agreed to like go to their death proclaiming that he was risen, but they all knew it was a lie.
No, what I'm saying is the people who were Jews in the Middle East 2,000 years ago were not white Caucasians from Poland.
I just looked.
They're the descendants of European converts. These people are the descendants of European converts. I don't understand why that's such a hard concept for people to grasp.
It's not true.
Or really. So explain it to me.
Okay.
No, what I'm saying is that diaspora was Africa. No, they didn't do that. No, they didn't do that. I'm saying they didn't do that. I'm saying that's myth. It's history. Yes.
We're good.
I'm just going to make a comment real quick. So I heard it mentioned Netanyahu was born in Tel Aviv officially. His family is from Poland, but he was born in Tel Aviv.
He's Polish.
Yeah,
Right.
he is Polish.
He's Polish.
But he was born in Tel Aviv.
Okay.
So I just want to make
He's
that.
Polish.
I got a quick question for you. What do you think of the Hannibal Directive?
Well, they obviously engaged that on October 7th, right? And so October 7th, this is another thing. October 7th, anybody who thinks that Hamas is an independent organization that just wants to kill Jews is ridiculous. They've been funded by the Israelis since day one. Okay? It's false flag stuff, just like we've been dealing with the Israelis forever. Are you guys Jews? Is that why you're having a problem with my statements here?
Totally a pro-Semite. So I will tell you that. Like, your shit is so far off from Dan Cooper stuff. It's amazing. I've never even heard anything as out.
I just want someone to explain to me how white people came from the Middle East. Can someone...
We're going to do the next question. We're going to move on to the next question right here.
You mentioned that you consider it to be odd to have multiple ideologies coming from relatively the same city and the same date. I am curious as to why you point to that being a particular oddity.
Well, it wasn't odd that the ideologies came from there, but the fact that they became so well addressed and prevalent, and they became ideologies that really kind of jump-started a lot of movements. I found it very interesting that it all came from late 1800s Germany.
I mean, fair. I can also point to at least 3 other cities and years where that has happened. So I
would definitely like to hear that.
Alexandria in between 300 BC and 300 AD.
Oh, of course, yes.
Yeah, I was going to say Paris in the late 1650s to the early 1700s. London for the majority of the 19th century. There's a couple others that I could list. I could rack my brain to try and list more. I'm just pointing out. I am curious as to why you point out one particular city. Like
because those ideologies seem to be very those ideologies jump-started movements that we still talk about today. And so for them to come from the same place, I thought was pretty fascinating. And especially for them to be so ideologically opposed, National Socialism, communism, you don't get any more polar opposite than that, Yes, sir.
So I'm curious. The history I've understood about this is that Arthur Balfour and the British, they set this up. They negotiated with the Arabs in order to. The idea was about the oil. When it became about the oil, Israel was going to be an aircraft carrier in the Middle East to support British, French, and American interests to control the region in order to keep those other states down and to keep them divided and conquered in order for the United States to exploit the oil.
That sounds good on paper.
Say that again?
That sounds good.
There was a Balfour Declaration.
Yes.
They did.
Yes. To bring America into the war.
They what?
The Balfour Declaration was basically a promise to bring America into the war if they could have Israel after the war. But that didn't happen. Same thing after World War II. They were made promises, still didn't happen. 2 world wars go by, and it's still no state of Israel. That's why they took their own steps with things like Sonborn, stealing all of our weapons. That's why they went ahead later on and stole our nuclear material. They're a parasite nation. They wouldn't exist without us, without our money, without our weapons, without our nukes.
I guess I'm agreeing with a lot of what you say, and I've heard a lot of what you're saying in different contexts. It's not, the particulars of it aren't, I'm open-minded to all the particulars you're saying. It's just the idea that who's the dog and who's doing the wagging of the dog.
Right.
Which is, we would have more responsibility as Americans then for what's all this horrible stuff, which was, Vietnam, that was 4 million people that the Jews didn't do that. We did that. That's a lot of people.
That's Lyndon Johnson, who was controlled by Israel the whole time.
There's a lot of, okay. I see what you're saying. Okay, but anyway.
Lyndon Johnson never won an election in his life. He stole every election he ever won. He was put in place where he was.
Anyway, that's good. Thanks.
Well, absolutely. But he was their puppet for sure. He was the first. He was a Jewish president who was under their control. That's a fact.
dispute that the most badass people ever. They control everything. They do everything. They're like the commodity.
Okay, next question right here.
No, you don't understand. It's not.
I do understand.
No, you don't. You obviously don't.
Okay.
I wanted to real quick dive into the Jewish question a little bit more, because I heard the speech that Hitler gave. You know, they convert all these speeches into English, which I think is actually really great for a better understanding. From my understanding, what he was basically saying was that Jews move into countries, destabilize,
Right.
things like that. From at least digging into Germany specifically, I can't speak for the surrounding countries, it seemed like a majority of Jews tied their lineage to what were the Germanic states even before the formation of what became the nation state of Germany. So can you maybe, I don't know exactly what my question is, speak to that more of, you said this started pre-1900. How did that exactly start? Like, what were the origins of that?
Well,
how did that tie into the Jewish question and the question of Zionism?
Sure. When you go back and you read through Hitler's speeches, he'll talk specifically about the degradation of German culture and how no Germans are going to the theater anymore. That basically, what he saw was Jews had successfully infiltrated and taken over every major aspect of his society. Okay? Well, I'm not saying he's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's what he thought. And so he saw places like Munich where there was, according to him, I don't know if we would agree, but he would say there was rampant prostitution. They were promoting homosexuality and transgender rights. That's a fact. I mean, we already know that. Right. So his major concern was the degradation of culture. I don't know if that answered your question, but his major concern was the degradation of German culture.
Yes.
Right.
So you mentioned that started even kind of pre-1900s. Was there any specific incidents there, or that's just sort of what?
Sorry. Or that's just sort of what they
1896 was when Herzl really started to go full force and push Zionism and try to write letters to world leaders. And he wrote to the Pope to try to convert all the Jews in Austria to Catholicism.
Okay, Herzl was German.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
1897, you have the first World Zionist Congress. And so that is when it really started to take off internationally. And when he pulled in people, so by the 1920s, you start getting people like Samuel Wise, Rabbi Samuel Wise in New York, who actually declared war against Germany and called for a boycott of all German goods long before any alleged Holocaust ever happened. Ultimately, World War II was a Jewish war against Germany.
I wanted to kind of follow up on that. So you're talking about Hitler's reasons for being against Jews. Wasn't one of the reasons that Hitler gave, was the Bolsheviks, that the Bolsheviks' leadership was heavily Jewish. They were funded by a lot of Jewish money, Jacob Schiff being most notable. And then, of course, the cultural stuff, the Frankfurt School came out of Germany around that time as well.
Yep.
But wasn't Bolsheviks probably the key thing? I mean, because fascism was like supposed to be a stopping point against
Yes,
Bolsheviks.
but I think that was more on a philosophical worldwide scale because the Bolsheviks weren't really affecting Germany directly. The Bolsheviks, ultimately what you have is 3% of the population of Russia was Jewish, overthrew the government, and then proceeded to murder 60 million Christians. Something like that? Is that what it was? That's not my...
Again, I was just asking for clarification. Can you say that again?
Yes. Jews made up about 3% of the population of Russia at the time, right? Russian Revolution, they murder the Tsar. Then they proceed to murder about 60 million Christians over the next, decade? So that's the short history of the real...
I mean, I thought it was kind of like anti-Christian, but...
I'm going to follow up real quick. Weren't there a lot of communist agitators coming across into Germany? I mean,
yes.
the Kristallnacht and all that. Wasn't a lot of that?
Right.
The
So
clampdown was to get rid of these communists, wasn't it?
that was a big thing, but there was a lot of communism in Germany also, and so that's where the brown shirts came from. Basically, Hitler created the brown shirts, and he would go beat up all the communists, right? So, but the communists ultimately, there wasn't enough support in Germany for them to actually be tangible in any manner.
But the fear was that Bolshevism just swept across Russia and all these other countries, socialism, that they were afraid that was going to come to Germany, and that's why fascism rose to stop that.
Right, that is definitely true.
Okay.
That is definitely true.
Okay.
But his major concern, when I read Hitler, I basically read about a guy with a broken heart because his country was being stolen out from under him by forces that he ultimately ultimately did control, but couldn't at first.
Think about Trump.
I'm sorry, say it again?
You think the same thing about Trump?
I'm sorry, can you put that in context for me?
That this fascism that he's bringing about is because of socialism.
I don't know. See, here's the problem that I have with Trump is that he contradicts himself all the time. Like his words and his actions seem to not be in alignment. So I have a hard time reading him on things. But one thing is obvious: he is a clear-cut Zionist, and that's his priority, at the expense of the American people. So.
My question is about your
by going to war with Iran, perhaps.
You seem to believe, in fact, I'm looking at the the numbers you gave, and I really don't know much about this history at all. But it seems like this tiny portion of world population is so gifted at infiltrating every government everywhere. Well, so maybe you can explain that to me, because it seems that either they hallucinate being special in the eyes of God, but they don't actually have that power, but yet somehow they can take over the world. Or the alternative is they're not really that gifted. They're just mean and cruel. And so what is your take on this? Is this a cultural issue with you?
100%. Well, let me ask you this question. So what did we hear for like a year about TikTok? Oh, it's going to have communist China influence. We have to, and what did they do? They forced a sale to, what's his name, Larry Ellison, who's a Jew, who's a diehard supporter of Israel, who's one of the largest funders to the IDF. And now you can't talk about Israel on TikTok at all. I mean, this is the perfect example of how Jews just come in and buy out the platform. They came in and bought out the platform to censor people in America for another country. You see what I'm saying? Like this over time equals what we have today.
I just want to, I think this is all fascinating. I've heard some of this before. I just want to say that do we have to, or should you be more clear on when you say Jews as opposed to the Zionists versus the Hasidic Jews versus the Orthodox? Because the Orthodox and the Hasidic Jews really do not support Zionism. That's why they don't go into the IDF, the ones that are living over in Israel. So I just wonder about, being clarity on which portion of this, religious ideology that is kind of driving some of this. So.
Well, it is specifically Zionist for sure. However, it's a difficult conversation to have, and people don't really know. This conversation here, I'm basically taking 10 years of research and putting it in 20 minutes, and it's not going to, you can't get points across you need to get across when you can't demonstrate, years and years and years of pattern forming, right? So it doesn't matter which conversation you have, the Zionist conversation or the Jewish conversation. It wasn't the Zionists getting run out of over 100 countries. So.
But not all the Jewish people support what's going on.
You're correct. Absolutely, 100%.
He's labeled them as a Jew.
Right.
And, it's not really fair to a lot of questions.
I agree with you 100%.
Okay, next question here.
Okay, one other quick question. In terms about the Holocaust, and this is just curiosity, in terms of at least people who died and things like that, weren't there modern day censuses that happened to be able to confirm? And then I could be wrong, but weren't the POW camps also pretty brutal? Like there were some similar tactics that came over. So isn't there some cross-reference from that to kind of confirm some of these things?
So your first question was about the numbers, right?
Yeah, were there censors?
Okay. Yes, absolutely. Census, right? People have just ignored the census numbers. So most people don't realize that somewhere around 2.5 million Jews got absorbed by the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union moved into Poland. Most people don't know that. 1 million of them got stuck on trains and sent to concentration camps in Siberia. And by my calculations, that means that the Soviets killed more Jews than the Germans did during World War II, just in that one act. So the numbers are all skewed. Nobody really knows exactly how many people died. When you look at historically the revisionists, what the revisions have already done, Auschwitz in 1990 went from 4.1 million people getting killed there to 1.1. But the 1.1 doesn't even make sense either. The real number of people who died at Auschwitz total, and you have to realize Jews made up around 30% of the population of most camps. The highest population camp was in Germany, and I think it was 45%. So the vast majority of people at these concentration camps weren't even Jews. Auschwitz probably somewhere in the neighborhood. God, it's so hard to say. Between 100 and 300,000 people probably died at Auschwitz. And what were the primary causes of death? Typhus, starvation, disease. And as far as brutality, oh God, that was brutality. It was a brutal slave labor system. It was something that nobody should have ever had to gone through, ever. But it's a far cry from murdering people in gas chambers, which is really the dumbest story that's ever been told to humanity. They're so easily debunkable.
So, in all honesty, Cory, are you just trolling us?
No, this is what I do for a living. And I've been a historian for 11 years.
Okay.
Can I ask how old you are?
Sure. Do you want to guess my weight?
No, I'm just curious because I find there's a generation gap, and that older generations are the most propagandized. So
I'm 54.
Okay, you're not too much older than me.
Can you speak more about our biggest scandal right now, role of Israel inside Jeffrey Epstein case?
So for a long time, people thought Jeffrey Epstein worked for the Mossad or the CIA, but it's seeming as though he is more of a international power broker who danced between all of these different agencies. He was most certainly, like today it came out that the Israeli government itself are the ones who set up the cameras in Epstein's Manhattan townhouse. That came out today. Because Ehud Barak was going in and out of there so often, they put it in there for security reasons. The Israeli government did that. So to say he wasn't working with Israel is not exactly true, but he's definitely an international power broker, probably centered around Israel and the US. So, I mean, I'm sure he had international dealings with everybody, but he lived in New York. He had, all of his connections that he was talking about in his emails are all Israelis.
So we won't even speak about who is Gillian Maxwell. He's right hand.
I'm sorry. I'm not an Epstein guy. I don't really study Epstein. It's not my. If it happened after 1968, I really don't care.
Next question.
Okay. Based on what you know about, in particular, late Ottoman history and their relationship with the United States, particularly the Barbary Wars, do you believe that the growth of Zionism can be attributed primarily to the role of particularly the Levant in terms of regulating international commerce, particularly in between Europe, North Africa, and the Far East, like China and Japan?
Right. I don't have an answer for you.
What do you think about the USS Liberty and the Levant affair?
Well, the USS Liberty, I mean, it's pretty clear-cut what happened. Ultimately, during the Six-Day War, they wanted to bring America in, like, in a big way. And so they attacked the Liberty. And that's pretty much all there is to it. I mean, it was most certainly a false flag.
I think a lot of people just may not know much about that.
So. Oh, okay. Yeah, so they attacked one of our ships, in case you didn't know. But it's not, I mean, to me, that's par for the course. So.
Wasn't the official story that it was an accident for 50 years, and recently, by recently I mean the last 20 years, the survivors have come out and said it wasn't an accident, they were silenced, and I think even PBS did a documentary essentially saying the same thing like 20 years ago.
Right. So to me, the Liberty incident is just one of like dozens and dozens that stand out to me as showing that we're a tool for them. They're not an ally to us at all.
Any closing thoughts?
Nope. If you guys want, my books are available on Amazon. I have 3 books coming out this year. That's about it.
That's our talk. Give it up for Cory Hughes.